Welcome to the SDA Housing Podcast, brought to you by NDIS Property Australia. Before starting this episode, we need to provide a general disclaimer. Information contained in this podcast is general in nature only. It does not take into account the objectives, financial situation, or needs of any particular person. You need to consider your financial situation and needs before making any decisions based on the information in this podcast. And you should consider seeking independent and professional advice for your personal circumstances. All right, let's begin.
Hello everybody, my name is Minh and I'm your host for today at NDIS Property Australia, and you're listening to the SDA Housing Podcast, a show that explains, highlights, guides and brings awareness about all things SDA in this ever-changing NDIS world. That we have a fantastic topic. It's called Builder Background Checks by the organisation called Builder Background Checks. Is that right? Yes.
Correct.
The website is builderchecks.com.au, and our guest speaker here is Brendan Watkins. Brendan, welcome today.
Hi, Minh. How are you?
Good, thank you. Mate, who are you and what do you do as an organisation?
Sure. Well, look, we've been in operation since 2018. I have come off being a 12-year building industry peak body CEO. And of course as a CEO was heavily involved in standards and disputes and regulations, both state and federal. And probably my greatest frustration in that role was that I couldn't answer the most common question that homeowners would pose, which of course is, who's the best builder, or which pool builder should I be using? Or very often people will say, all right, well, if you can't answer that, who would you use to build? Because, of course, in peak bodies, all members are the same. So it got me thinking about what background checking would I do, and we compiled a list of the elements, and there's many elements. You know, it's well over 20 ports of call that I think need to be looked at if someone's to do a thorough due diligence. And essentially that's the report offerings that we offer at Builder Background Checks. So do you want me to tell you about what the reports offer?
Well, before we get to that, you say peak body.
Yeah.
What is a peak body, and where were you located, and all that kind of stuff, and what were the issues you saw back then that you see now is an opportunity for you to launch this business 2 years ago, given all the issues around Australia at the moment with construction?
Well, as people may know, the construction sector or the industry represents more liquidations than any other sector in the country, and it has been that case for many years. And so, it's high risk, high reward in construction, and we operate in Melbourne. From Melbourne, we're national. We offer the service right around the country, and get our heads around the varying needs. Obviously, state governments having the mandate as they do, the regs vary in every state. So there's little commonality around registration, licensing, insurance, permits, inspections. They're all different in every state of the country. And so, though we're based in Melbourne, we have our heads around the needs of what occurs in other states, and we offer the service out of Melbourne.
Yep. And which peak body were you part of back then?
I was with SPASA, so swimming pool construction, pools and spas. But, probably the most common peak bodies that people are aware of are HIA and Master Builders are the predominant. And I guess, as I alluded to earlier, that people are very much wanting to know who they should be using. And at the end of the day, the reality is every member in a peak body is considered to be equal. They're all the same. And, of course, the reality is, the courts and the dispute state regulation bodies and the regulators themselves find that they're being clogged with builders who are registered and who are members of peak bodies, but they're not doing the right thing. So everyone's not equal, and consumers, when something goes wrong, homeowners, when something goes wrong, are amazed that the government or the peak body doesn't step in to defend their rights. Because the reality is, at the end of the day, builders who aren't doing the right thing are only operating to the minimum standard, and the minimum standard is quite low. People's expectation, by and large, is that they want better than the minimum standard. And, of course, delays and cost blowouts are something that people want to avoid. Generally speaking, they're not illegal depending on the contract that's being used. And so what we do is try and sift out for people the builders that are commonly presenting ongoing problems for consumers. And if you know where to look, it's reasonably easy to identify the people that aren't satisfying the regulators. ASIC, they're not paying their bills on time, their risk score is low, and we're able to identify those sorts of issues so that people don't have bad experiences.
Yeah. Okay, so my next question is, how your organisation is a one-man band? There's people behind you. How do you do the background checks? It's hard for our listeners to understand what I've seen your reports. What goes on behind the scenes with you and your team to put everything together with regards to the reports, and how do you find it all?
Sure.
So easily, yeah.
Well, we have a list of ports of call. There's 2 reports, a comprehensive and an essentials. The comprehensive, as it says, it looks everywhere we know to be able to assess data, to be able to make an opinion about the builder. So we subscribe to mercantile agencies. So, there's a financial cost in getting things like, of course, ASIC records, as in who are the directors. Yep. But what people very often want to know is, are those directors involved in other companies where there's issues? Or are those directors involved in companies that have phoenixed, so businesses that have collapsed and they've rebadged, they've got new directors in and they've launched a new business with a new name, and we can identify cross-directorships, people who hold multiple directorships. Of course, a risk score is something that everyone is very keen to get their hands on, and that's essentially what's the probability of the builder failing in the next 12 months. And if you're signing a contract, you're pretty much going to be hyper aware of what occurs in the next 12 months. What payments are being made, as in the time? Are they paying 7 days? Are they paying 30 days to the creditors that offer credit to these builders, or do they have amounts overdue? Or even worse, do they have defaults? So on a formal default register, have they not paid creditors? We're able to access ATO debts. So if a builder owes the tax office more than $100,000 and it's 90 days overdue and they're not negotiating a settlement, we're able to access that data. And they're key red flags that something's not right, and it's not the sort of thing that people will be able to see by just Googling online. The thing, I've always been amazed as an industry peak body CEO that most people choose their builder by talking to family or friends or a neighbour, and essentially because it's so overwhelming, the notions of licenses and permits and finance and a whole lot of terminology that people don't understand, they just go for a referral. And invariably this spend that people are making is often, if not the most, it's the second most largest spend they'll ever make in their life to build their dream home, and the amount of due diligence people do is minuscule.
Yes.
So that data that I've just mentioned is key, but additional to that, the other sorts of work we'll do is see if they've been in the courts or if they're currently in the courts. We check ACCC, we check WorkSafe, we check state public warnings and state registers, state warnings. We check if they're licensed and if the license is appropriate for the sorts of work that the consumer is doing. If the regulator, like the building regulator, has penalised the builder, very often there'll be fines and penalties, but they don't necessarily rub the builder out. It's a big deal to disqualify a builder's licence. And so very often, you'll find warnings about builders that have been slapped over the wrist several times by the regulators, and consumers are very keen to know that.
Here's a question about licenses. Builder nominees. So when a company who starts up, they're not really a construction company. They hire out a hired gun who's a fully licensed builder as a one-man team, but uses his license as a nominee, licensee. What's your opinion about that kind of operation who engages a freelancer like that?
Well, it's not uncommon. It's more common in the commercial space. Certainly in the residential space, it's quite uncommon. Ultimately, well, the first thing I should say is we're not lawyers. So that question really should be addressed by a lawyer. But what our recommendation is around the consumer residential space is what matters most is the most important elements of the build lining up. So it's about ensuring a contract is with a registered builder, and the registered builder who provides the insurance and the permit, ensuring they all line up. So regardless of the corporate history or the corporate association, it's ensuring, and the best way to do it is a construction specialist lawyer, ensuring that all of the key documents line up: contract, registration, permit, insurance, and that way you can engage a surveyor or an inspector to sign off, and if it is that something goes wrong, you've got all your ducks lined up in a row. But the scenario you've alluded to is less common in the residential space. But, increasingly, if you're looking at blocks of apartments and towers in the city and whatever else, there's a very, very, very much an arm's length relationship between the registered builder and the developer who's ultimately paying for and owning the development.
Brendan, thank you for that detailed answer. However, I have a more simple advice to any mum and dad buyer.
Yeah.
And that is, if you're talking to a building brand, it's simple to do a little background check on ASIC. Look at their company, the holding company, who the directors and equity owners are of that company.
Yep.
It could be person one, person two, 50-50. But when you look at the contract for the building contract, it's a different licensee.
Yeah.
Who isn't an owner of that company. Right?
Yeah.
And I would say to any buyer, well, why is there a licensee who's not part of the company, who's just there as a licensee? I mean, my opinion is, if you're doing business with a builder, you're doing business with the builder, not two guys in a shell company here, brand, with a nominated licensee over here. I mean, they might say, yeah, we have our license and we have our insurance. Yeah, but to me, that's just a fall guy if something goes wrong. If something goes wrong in the whole company, the licensee's on the runner. He's gone, disappeared, but the two guys left over here with that, holding the mess, are not licensed.
Yeah.
So that's just a very simple, quick little analysis if a mum and dad doesn't know who to really how to vet. That's just a simple way to do it. Number one there. Yeah.
Yeah, but I guess that the point is, if you're pulling documents of ASIC, you're really only getting that corporate entity. You're not getting the relationship of all of the others. And invariably, when you've got larger developers, invariably it's not at all uncommon to find them to have 20, 30, 50, 60, 70 other companies, because invariably what they're doing is forming a company, developing a site, and they're calling it, 123 Smith Street. They finish the building, they close the company. Yep. And they start another company, and that's what you want to know. If they've had problems, if they've had claims, if they've been in the courts with those varied names, they're enormous red flags that there's a potential for the job that they're doing to have issues.
Yeah. Well, most of our listeners on our podcast, they're mostly mum and dad investors looking at buying house and land. So normal builders, normal everyday resi builders, yeah. But anyway, the point is your service is a very sophisticated, detailed look into everything relevant before a consumer would engage a builder to proceed with and so forth, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So the elements I mentioned, we also do what most people do, that they ask a neighbour, they ask a friend, they ask a family member, and normally they'll then get on those builder review sites and say,
yes,
we know there's half a dozen sort of half-decent ones. The point I'd make about getting online on the review sites is increasingly what happens is, and I've seen it happen many, many times, is if someone gives a bad review, the builder will take action against them, or at least threaten to take action against somebody who is making negative comments about a builder. And invariably, so there's reputation cleansers who are out there offering people money or threatening litigation to have people change the reviews, negative reviews. And I think that, happens more and more. And look, you can't tell me, I know of it happening, of builders who get family and friends to write glowing reviews on their sites. And I know of builders who have come up very, very poorly in our reports that have glowing social media references. There's a disconnect there. So while they're useful, the review sites are useful, and very often fabulous builders have fabulous reviews. But I'd also make the point that some of the very best builders I know, and I know them personally from my years at Sparsa, they don't have a social media profile. Yeah. And they don't have, they're never mentioned on the builder review sites. And very often they're the people I'd be using. Well established, been in the game many years. They don't need to do advertising. They don't need to run around waving the flag, putting ads on Facebook and putting ads on Google, because they get the work through referrals. And referrals are the cheapest advertising you can possibly get.
Yep, agreed. So in the last 2 or so years, Brendan, how many reports have you run? And how many have
trade secret? We can't give that away.
Well, 100, 50? No. Not. I'm not asking you how many reports have you, how many clients have engaged you. I'm asking you how many reports have you run yourself, just running them, just for you to see the backgrounds that come up pretty bad on your end to say, well, I wouldn't touch them at all. I mean, you know what I mean?
Yeah, look, it's funny. It's probably not how do I answer this? Look, the truth is the vast majority of people that will spend upwards to $1 million will do a referral from a friend or family and maybe Google the websites and see if they can find any dirt on a builder. The people that come to me are people like me.
Yes.
So they're conservative, they're risk adverse, they want to dot every I and cross every T. So I think the majority of reports that I do come up pretty clean. There's a scale, but my clientele tends to be people that have done a lot of homework. And invariably the builders they bring to me are okay.
Yes.
There's a percentage of the people that come to me, maybe 30%, who have real concerns about a builder. And, some of the red flags are, he's the cheapest builder and he can start next month. That's telling me something doesn't quite add up in this climate. And so if people have concerns and they tell me what the concerns are, I do a report and it confirms the concern. I did one yesterday that was exactly that. They'd heard from neighbours and friends in a country town that the builder hadn't paid the painter hasn't paid a scaffolder and a roofer, and it was tens of thousands of dollars, and they were really worried. And so and they'd paid a deposit and were on the verge of signing the contract. And the report, of course, confirmed that there were issues about their creditworthiness, about defaults, and there are a percentage of people that have real concerns, and I can confirm it or otherwise.
Yeah.
But invariably, the people that come to me are the minority that are doing the right thing. They're not getting one quote; they're getting 3, 4, 5, 6 quotes, and I know that's hard to do, but that's the ideal. And and invariably, they've done a fair bit of due diligence themselves, and they want peace of mind, and they're the sorts of people that come to us.
Yeah. So with builders, normally they may have trade credit, pay 90 days time or 30 days, 60 days time. Those tradies who work as subbies under the builder environment,
yeah,
do they get paid 30 days later, or is it normally 60 to 90 days? What's their process normally? And how, is that too long a lag for your system to pick up?
Well, normally the data we can access tells when people are paying outside of terms.
Okay.
So that's what you want to know. Look, I've found that there's a lot of variability now around payment of suppliers and subbies. It used to be sort of 30 days, 14 days sometimes, depending on who it is and the length of the relationship and the like. But invariably, now that things are tightening up, and things are very, very tight right now, some subbies are saying, they want half up front, people that are doing foundations and the like for enormous cost. And a volume builder comes to them and says, we've got 40 sites. It's big money. And a lot of them won't start until they've got 20 or 30 or 40% in the bank.
Yes, exactly. So your service at builderchecks.com.au, you got a upfront inquiry and also a 12-month monitoring process. Can you please explain to our listeners what that service entails, both of them?
Sure. Well, the monitoring is essentially to tell people beyond the report. So you can only do the monitoring after you've purchased a report.
Yep. Yes.
If there's significant material change. And obviously the significant material change is around the company structure changing in some significant way. So directors coming on or going off, the shareholding changing. Probably most importantly is if there's a default, if there's a change to the risk rating, or if the builder appears in court. And they're red flags. Sometimes people will come to me. We also have an advice service so that if people haven't done a report but they know that we exist, they'll come to us and just pay for advice. And, very often it's one of the red flags is the builder comes and wants money in advance of a prescribed payment.
Yeah.
So they're saying, look, we can't go on, because I've got to order materials or I've got to get something delivered or I've got to pay the boys. We need 10 grand or 20 grand. And that's telling you that something's not right. And of course, our core advice is that particularly these days, you shouldn't be proceeding on a residential build unless you've got a construction specialist lawyer on side.
Yes.
And I think, any variations should be cited by the lawyer.
Yes.
And any payments should also be signed off by a lawyer just for peace of mind. When things go wrong, invariably it's halfway through a build and people, if they've paid more than the prescribed amount, it's very hard to get somebody to come along and finish that job if there's not enough money left in the kitty.
Just so our listeners can understand the process, if you haven't built a house yet. So a standard HIA contractor in Australia really is a 5-payment drawdown process between the lender and the builder. If there is a variation or a change to pricing or materials, then the builder will issue a variation document to be signed off and then the extra payment paid. I mean, other than that process there, is anything different to that, what people would expect there at all, Brendan?
Sorry, say that again?
Would there be anything much different to that process of a five-stage payment, HIA payments, and then also a variation signature? That's pretty standard. There's nothing else to really, no more surprises really other than that, is there?
No, there's not. And those, and probably really importantly, those stages need to be signed off by a surveyor or an inspector. So they're people that do the same thing, but they're just called. They've got a different name in various states.
Yes.
So surveyor in Victoria and inspector in New South and I think Queensland. So they need to be signed off as meeting the standard, and then the request for payment is made for that stage. And it's another thing that, people should consider doing is having their own independent inspector. So there's a whole lot of independent building inspectors who are ex-builders or ex-surveyors or people that know the building trade, and they can work with you, that they can visit the site. They know what's going on. They know how the construction should look, what sorts of tips and traps that people, errors that people might be making, and they can go in there and be your set of eyes. And when it is that there's a prescribed payment that needs to be made, the builder can inspect. And very importantly, it's an opportunity to say, well, all right, the building's met the minimum standard, but there's an opportunity maybe to improve that minimum standard and improve the amenity or the functionality of the house. And they can have that discussion with the owner. And very often people will, and I encourage people to do it. You get a lawyer on your team, and you get a building inspector that's independent, and rarely will things go wrong. And if things do go wrong, you've got the right people on your team to ensure you can get your way out of it.
Yeah. I've seen recently a lot more lender requirements where they want photos be sent through as proof of the stage being completed before payment of that stage. Yeah. So I think an extra layer of safety for a buyer, consumer, would be to hire a local building inspector who works for you to go out on site on every stage. Maybe cost you $1,000 or so, just to have an extra set of eyes, as Brendan suggests. Yeah, certainly. Exactly
right. Yeah. And look, I'm always dubious of photos. There's nothing like seeing it with your own eyes. There have been cases of surveyors, inspectors sending photos in for progress payments when, the photos aren't the actual site of the homeowner.
Would you class a quantity surveyor just as good as a building inspector to come in these stages to check it out or not?
Well, it depends on their background. So a quantity surveyor is really about, pricing, not necessarily constructing and estimating ballpark costs of what the project might be. But depending on what their background is, they might be suitable.
Sure. Okay. Well, back to my original question. So you got the initial report, the ongoing report, and the advice. Do you mind explaining your charges, your fees that your company charges for those three services, please?
Yeah, sure. So the most common report that most people get is the comprehensive. So it's $339. Yep. Everybody wants it yesterday because they leave it to the last minute. So we do have the option of getting it within 24 hours, tick a box for another $40. You'll get the comprehensive in 24 hours. The other report is an essentials, $279. And as I say, the advice, which is becoming increasingly popular. So it's $75 for 30 minutes, but depending on what the problem is, people invariably want to have a few chats, and so it's sort of open to negotiation, because very often probably the most common conversation is around people being told one thing by a builder, being told another thing by somebody who might know building, or they don't have their own inspector, or they're being told something different by a surveyor, and they're looking for an independent view. And it might take 2 or 3 discussions to see through what the issue is. And so it's an option that increasingly is available. For the comprehensive report. When that's delivered, we offer a free conversation about what the findings are, what the issues are, and have a bit of a chat about what the next steps are. Most of the builders do check out to be okay.
Yes.
And so people, proceed on their merry way. But, invariably there's some red flags, as the one I flagged the other day, and that's where I think they need some legal advice around builder not paying their bills and got a poor risk rating. If you're absolutely set on using that builder, then there are some protections around getting maybe their accountant to provide an audited set of financials, or someone independent giving you confidence that their financials are in shape.
Yep.
That's the general gist of what our offerings are.
And the 12-month monitoring service, how much does that cost?
$295 for the 12 months.
Yes.
And so that's having any issues that people should really be aware of, raising red flags. If you're halfway through a build, it's not going to mean you can cancel the contract and walk away. But it allows you to be on guard, I suppose, and to take any steps to best protect your interest.
So here's a question. Someone's going through a build, halfway through, things are slowing down, they come to you for a report, some red flags comes up, and they're wondering, what's going to happen now? Because at the moment around Australia, the question that people who are going through construction is my builder going to be able to deliver me an end product here? And as the last 6 months have shown on the news, so many families have come out crying, saying, oh my God, my builder's gone belly up. My home is half built. What now? So when that happens, it's too late, as we know. But if someone, how does someone protect themselves halfway through a build when they're having concerns about the viability of survival of this builder, and there are red flags on your report? What do they do then? Because you're in construction.
Yeah.
What's next?
Well, I think I've understood the question, but unfortunately, in every state, the mandatory insurance varies. So everyone has a different scenario. But just speaking in general terms, if people don't pay money, if people only pay according to the prescribed contract terms, then the mandatory state insurance allows for someone to step in and finish the job, and it won't cost any more. That's the intent of the insurance. Yes. One of the things that a lot of people don't understand is invariably the insurance, well, certainly in Victoria, and as I say, it varies state to state, but the insurance is only for 20% of the job. It's not for the entire value of the job. And that 20% gives a little bit of play that if the job's halfway through and, it's $1 million and the consumer's paid $500,000, the insurance is only for the $200,000 that allows a bit of give and take for someone else to come along and finish the job for the other $500,000. So that's one of the quirks of it. Where people have real problems is when they've paid too much money. Or they're paid when an inspection hasn't happened, and they're paid in advance. They've fallen for some story that, I just need 20 grand or 50 grand or whatever to pay subbies or materials or whatever it might be. So that's why it's very important to have informed, qualified people on your team, a lawyer, an inspector.
Yes, exactly. I totally agree. Yes.
Yep.
Any words of advice from you to anyone who's about to embark on a build for a house? Before coming to you, just simple advice. Yeah.
Well, look, free advice is don't rush. It's not a race. So many people that I've dealt with over the last 20 years or so, they think it's a rush to get a builder and sign a contract and then they can relax.
Yeah.
That's not the case. And invariably, the most important thing consumers have got to do is find the right builder. You find the right builder and sign a contract with the right builder, you've got to do the legwork now. The gun doesn't pop when you sign the contract. It's so important to do your due diligence beforehand. And it is difficult, and it is dealing in an area where people are outside their comfort zone.
Yes.
But you put the legwork in before you sign the contract, you get the right builder, and it's highly likely you're not going to have any problems. So it's not a race. Don't rush, and I think things will be fine. And if people want us to be involved in helping with their due diligence, that's the service we offer.
That's great. Brendan, I think you've given us a lot of food for thought, our listeners today. What's the best way for people to contact you?
Look, just the website, builderchecks.com.au. It's pretty straightforward. I don't want to make it a complex process. There's 2 reports. There's advice if people want it, but invariably the vast majority of people we engage with buy the comprehensive report.
Mm-hmm.
It's all the bells and whistles. We do the report. We average 1 to 2 day turnaround, and we have a conversation after that report. We've also got some free resources on the website about how to proceed conservatively.
Yes.
And we're here for people that need help.
Wonderful. My last question to you is, can your service handle an inquiry about a non-builder?
A non-registered builder?
No, I'm talking about another business outside of construction.
Sorry. I don't understand the question.
So let's say I wanted to vet a plumber or vet some other organisation. Can your resources handle that inquiry, the background checks of non-construction?
Well, generally speaking, yes. Outside of construction, we're tailored towards construction because it's so varied. It goes across all sorts of insurances and state and federal regulations and standards and licence and insurance. But yeah, invariably, if it is people want to know about company structures, if they want to know about court appearances, if they want to know about upsetting regulators, federal bodies, we have access to all of that sort of data.
Okay, wonderful. Brendan, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. We'll have, I'm sure our listener base will be very keen to contact you rather than me asking about, is this builder going to survive? My answer is always going to be, I don't know. They're dropping like flies at the moment. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Good on you, man. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please make sure you are subscribed and following us so you can keep in the loop with all of our upcoming episodes. We would really appreciate it if you could leave us a 5-star rating, a written review, and to share this podcast with those that could benefit. Until next time, catch you on the next episode.